Morning.
Morning.
How's everybody?
Good.
Have a good time at small group activities?
Yeah.
Have a good time last night?
Yeah.
It's pretty awesome, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It's always great when you can get together with a few hundred of your closest friends and share the joy that comes from having Jesus in your life. I know the rest of today is going to be pretty great. There's lots more music from Bright Light Parade. That's right. And there'll be some more messages and some more testimonies from the kids on design team, and those are always really interesting. But you have to get through this first. So we'll try to keep it short. Now, what's the theme for the weekend?
Swag.
Which means?
Saved with amazing grace.
All right. Swag. Saved with amazing grace. I love that. I had never heard this term before Convo, but I love it. I love it because there's nothing more exciting. There's nothing more fun to talk about than God's amazing grace, right? You remember the scripture for the weekend? We didn't want to forget that one. What was it? Ephesians 2:8. God saved you by His grace when you believed. I want you to just take a second and listen to that. I want you to hear what it says as we get started because it's important. God saved you by His grace when you believed. And that's all you've got to do is believe. Doesn't matter who you are. Doesn't matter what you've done. You believe in God. You accept Jesus Christ as your Savior. And boom, God's grace is there for you, no matter what. I've got a question for you. Now, first I need to know this. How many of you are here with one of your parents this weekend? How many have mom or dad as chaperone?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I know mom or dad are along on this weekend. Okay. So, you had your hand up. If you're here with your mom or dad, or I guess if you're a mom or dad and you're here with your kids, you are excused from answering this question. The rest of you, I'm going to ask to see hands. How many of you have a place, a secret place, that you go to when you just have to get out of the house and away from your family? I mean, you love your family. They're the most important people in your lives, but how many of you have to have somewhere to go that's out of the house and away from everybody else, just once in a while? Okay. Adults can answer too. Okay. Okay, that's about what I figured. You know, I think that most of us know that feeling when we just have to get away from everybody else, even if it's just for a little while. A long time ago, when I was young, I had a place like that. I grew up, I never quite grew up. I lived 90 miles from here when I was a kid, over on Lake Michigan, a town called Manitowoc. It's a lovely town. It was a great place to be a kid. Just so many different things to do. Up until I was about your age, my family lived out near the edge of town, South 32nd Street. And we had a nice little 2-bedroom house on a block of nice little houses. All grew up shortly after World War II. And our church was a block away this way, and our school was a block away that way, which I wasn't that thrilled about. The school, I mean. But it was a pretty good life. That's the way I remember it anyway. But I did have parents. I did go to school. I did have an older brother. Some of you know what that's like, right? So, with all that going on, every once in a while I just needed to get out of the house and disappear. A kid needs his privacy. Sometimes I would be gone for an entire day. And this was before cell phones, remember, but this was before touch-tone phones. We had the old, dial phones where you had to go like that to make calls. So when I was gone for the day, I was gone. I could have been on the moon as far as anybody else knew. Now that I think of it, whenever I did that, Mom never seemed to mind. I'm not sure what that means. I'll have to think about that. So where would I go when I needed to get away? I would go to a place, sounds very exotic. We'd go to the clay pit. You walk 3 or 4 blocks to the end of 32nd Street, come to this big fancy house that had a big fenced garden. The fence was about this high, wrought iron. Had a gate on it. Looked like something out of a magazine. It was all very neatly cared for. The grass was all trimmed. The bushes were all trimmed in different shapes. Seemed like there were always flowers blooming there. But if you went up to the gate, you kind of jiggled the lock a little bit, you could open it. And then you'd go in. If they didn't want us in there, they should have put a better lock on it. But then you walk through the garden, you go through some trees at the edge of the garden, and you go down this steep path. And you're there. The clay pit. It's just this big open space scooped out of the earth, split by the Manitowoc River that ran through it. My understanding is they actually used to mine clay there years before, but it hadn't been active in many years, even when I was a kid. So it was just this big, empty, deserted, unused space. And it was perfect. My cousin and I, cousin was my best friend back then. My cousin and I would pack a lunch and we'd go there in the morning and we'd spend the whole day just poking around. I think we always hoped that we might find some old Indian arrowheads or something, but all we ever found were cigarette butts and empty cans. But the point was, we were by ourselves. We were a couple of 10, 11, 12-year-old kids, 13 years old, unsupervised. Now this was the perfect place, I was told by other people, to pretend that you were in the wilderness and test your fire starting skills. But it would have been wrong to do that without adult supervision. So we didn't, of course. But even though you were within the city limits in the clay pit, you could really pretend that you were the last people on earth and that there really would be almost no evidence to the contrary. And there was one other thing there. It's called the Chicago and Northwestern High Bridge. We just called it the bridge back then. I've looked it up since. It was this old railroad bridge that crossed the river a little bit east of where we entered the clay pit. When my cousin and I were really young, we'd pretend we were commandos. sent to blow up a German bridge during World War II. We'd take dirt, we'd rub it on our faces, camouflage. Tie some sticks together to be dynamite, and then we'd crawl up to the tracks and lay the dynamite against the tracks and light the fuse, a string. Well, we wouldn't actually light it, of course, because that would be wrong. And if it happened to rain while we were there, we could hide out under the bridge, huddled up against this big concrete block at the top of the bank. And if you've ever sat in a car at a railroad crossing while a big freight train went by, and you heard that sound, just try and imagine what it would sound like if you were sitting under it. It was just all thunder and clouds of dust falling from the bridge above us. When that happened, you could feel it just as much as you could hear it. When I look back now, the clay pit was a great place to get away. It was a great place for a kid. But there was one thing about it. We had only ever gotten to explore half of it. Because remember I said the Manitowoc River ran through it, so we'd only explored the south side. And the north bank, the pit on the far side of the river, beckoned to us like an undiscovered country. It mocked us from the north side. It was this great mystery sitting up there, so I suppose it was just a matter of time. It was really only a matter of time before my cousin or I don't remember who had the idea. One of us got the idea that we needed to explore this place. Now, there were a number of ways you could do it. We could have swum across the river, but I don't swim. Could have taken a boat or a raft across the river, only we didn't have a boat or a raft. And I suppose we could have huck-finned it and built a raft, only that would be an awful lot of work. And we decided it would be really, really dangerous, and we didn't want to do anything really, really dangerous. So we decided to take the bridge over in Chicago and Northwestern High Bridge. Looking back, we did not give this idea a great deal of thought. 12-year-old boys are not known for their insight and forethought. Not back in my day, anyway. We were just down at the clay pit one Saturday, and we were looking across at the other side, and one of us said, "You know what? We got the bridge right there. We could walk over there." And the other one said, "Sure, why not?" Because we were unsupervised. So we climbed the side of the pit, and we scrambled up onto the right-of-way, and we started walking. Do you know why they call it the High Bridge? It is flippin' high, yes. It is 80 feet high. 80 feet above the Manitowoc River. You could park an 8-story building under it and just be scraping the top of the building. And you know something else? You know how railroad tracks are, right? You've got the steel rails on both sides, and in between those rails you have the ties, those wooden things. On the High Bridge, the space between those railroad ties was space. It was open. Open like you could look down and see the river 80 feet below you. I know this because that's what I was doing. I was in the lead for some reason, walking right down the center of that bridge. I was walking right down the center of the bridge because there were no railings on the side. So I was in the center of the bridge looking down. And that bridge is over 1,000 feet long. You hear that? 1,000 feet. What's that, maybe 2 or 3 blocks? Should be able to walk that pretty fast. If you walk at a normal pace, you can walk pretty fast. You should cover that in no time. No. When you're walking like this, looking down, it takes you a really long time to get across the bridge. I think it was about a day and a half. That's what it felt like anyway. We're walking. I'm in the lead. And we were in the middle of the bridge. I promise you, we were smack in the middle of the bridge, 80 feet up, 500 feet from either side. And my cousin behind me says, "Hey, you don't think the train's running today, do you?" Great time to bring that up. Going like that now. But eventually we made it. And as it turns out, there wasn't anything worth seeing on the other side. Now we had to get back. So we reviewed our options. Boat, no. Raft, no. Swim, no. And we came to the same conclusion: we would have to take the bridge to get back. We sat and we pondered this for a bit, and we just didn't see any other solution, so we got back up on the bridge and we walked over. But you'll be happy to know that I learned my lesson. I made my cousin walk in front of me, because if we were going to get hit by a train, I wanted him to get it first, and I wanted to know it. Sometimes you do things in your life that you know are wrong, but you don't see any alternatives, so you just keep doing them. Sometimes you get so caught up in doing something, even though you know that it's not the right thing, but you just keep pushing your way through, hoping that something will change, that something better is going to come along. But when you find yourself in that situation, you know what? There is an alternative. There is an alternative to the same old, and that is to stop. Stop. Admit to what you've done. Admit to what you've done, and then ask for forgiveness. Because that's what I did. I told my mom what we did. Of course, it was 30 years later. But I did tell her. And she did forgive me. She called me an idiot. But she forgave me. Sometimes it takes us a while to admit that we've dug ourselves a hole and we need God's help. Sometimes it just takes us a while to admit that we need God's grace. But when that moment comes, it can be beautiful, and it will change your life forever.